Hi everyone, Sam from PsyTech at Salford here, and today I want to talk about experimental software. So, if you search experimental software in Google, you'll find that there's actually quite a lot of different solutions that you can use to perform experimental tasks. And all of these have a large number of similarities, but there are also some subtle differences between the different solutions that might mean that one is better in a particular application. So what we're going to do today is have a look at 4 different solutions that we use at Salford. And those are Pebble, EEPROM, PsychoPi, and Gorilla. Okay, so we'll start with Pebble, which is the psychology experiment building language. And what Pebble is its own specially developed language for coding psychology experiments. However, we don't actually tend to use it for its building capabilities. We don't tend to use it to build tasks. What we tend to do is take advantage of the fact that Pebble comes with around about 50 pre-made tasks available for you to try and use in your research. These tasks are largely based on published works, so have some proven validity, and you'll find most of the kind of typical examples you'll see in a lot of experimental research represented there, so things like the Stroop and go no-go tasks are available. Pebble is freely available and open source, so you can go download it at home and give any of these tasks a try, which makes it really useful if you just want to explore some different tasks. And one of the big advantages of Pebble is it makes it really easy to string together different tasks into a task battery. So Pebble will be really useful if you're looking to run a fairly standardized task or set of tasks within an experimental laboratory setting. For the other systems I'll be talking about in this video, we'll quite often be looking at building our own tasks, though it is possible to obtain tasks for these systems either online or through generous researchers who are willing to share the tasks they've used. Even then, we'll probably want to be making adaptations to these tasks, so it's useful to understand a little bit about how they work. Okay, let's start with EEPROM. EEPROM is a piece of licensed software. So for students, it's only going to be available for you to use at the university. However, EEPROM is quite a popular piece of software, so lots of universities will have it, and certainly lots of businesses that are collecting behavioural data will use EEPROM as well. EEPROM is largely based on a graphical user interface. That means that it's visual. You don't have to code to create your experiments, though it does provide the opportunity to do that in a language called eBasic. So you can add quite flexible functionality to your experiments. So there are 2 key components that make up the functionality of EEPROM, and these are procedures and lists. Now, procedures can be thought of as just a series of instructions that the computer uses to determine how a task should be displayed. You can think of it kind of like a timeline, or I've been known to describe it as kind of a fancy version of PowerPoint, where you can program how long something should be displayed for, or whether somebody needs to interact with it. Lists, comparatively, contain data that define variables related to the task. This might mean, for example, that it would contain the file paths for different images that are going to be presented in your task, or perhaps different words and colours that are going to be used as stimuli in your task. Another way of thinking of a list is as a spreadsheet. And like many pieces of experimental software, you can think of EEPROM as being essentially spreadsheet driven. In the case of EEPROM, your lists are your spreadsheets, and each row will represent a trial. The columns are used to represent your variables, and you can enter values into each cell that represent the levels of these variables that should be used for each trial. EEPROM has a really high level of precision, and it's often considered the gold standard in timing. So this means it's really useful for running studies where a very high level of precision is required, for example, in EEG studies. It's also quite easy to build quite powerful experiments using the interface, so I found beginners can pick up EEPROM fairly quickly, and it's easy to get EEPROM communicating with other devices, so you can automatically mark events, such as the points where stimuli have been presented, in the data that you're collecting elsewhere. One major drawback to EEPROM, however, is that it has no online functionality and is only available for lab use. So next up is PsychoPi, which is an open source experiment builder based on the Python programming language. Like EEPROM, it also has a graphical user interface, and that's called Builder, though it's also very easy to code experiments in the Coder view. Within PsychoPy's builder, you can also integrate code components alongside the builder's inherent objects. This makes for really quick and convenient, but really flexible programming of experimental tasks. PsychoPy's builder is essentially built on three main components, which are the flow, routines, and loops. A routine can be thought of as a phase within your experiment or trial. For example, it might be a time during which a piece of stimuli is presented, or during which you are waiting for some kind of participant response. Loops within PsychoPy describe which routines should be looped through, for example, to create trials. Like with EEPROM, these loops are driven by spreadsheets, so you can also specify variables that you want to control during each iteration of the loop. Finally, there is the flow, which can be thought of as a timeline for your experiment. It describes the order in which the routines and loops happen. PsychoPy is incredibly flexible and allows for stimuli to be adapted dynamically. What this means is that you can change the stimuli every time that the monitor is refreshing, and this happens on most monitors around about every 17 milliseconds. This makes it really easy to produce moving stimuli, for example, a rotating wheel or a moving image. And, being open source, you can access PsychoPy at home. Like EEPROM, PsychoPy can achieve a very high level of precision in its timings, and does also have some facility to create online experiments in JavaScript, though this does require some kind of hosting solution. It's also a really useful tool to gently ease you into Python programming using code components to create bits of your trials alongside the functionality within the builder. Okay, so last up in this video is Gorilla. And Gorilla is a bit different to EEPROM and PsychoPy, since Gorilla is a system based on online data collection. Gorilla does still have a pretty high level of precision. However, because you're not able to control the hardware with which somebody is accessing the tasks that you're creating, this means that it's naturally going to be a bit less accurate as you don't have control. This means you're probably not going to be wanting to use Gorilla for something that has a really high level of precision required, like an EEG study. However, if you're running an EEG study, you're not going to be doing that online anyway. Being built for online data collection, Gorilla is also what I'd call a complete experiment package. It can manage online performance tasks, obviously, but it can also manage questionnaires and complex experimental structures, including things like delay periods for intervention studies or the random grouping of participants. In terms of building performance tasks, Gorilla has a graphical user interface as well, but you can code experiments in JavaScript. And like EEPROM and PsychoPy, Gorilla is also spreadsheet driven. However, I would say there's one key difference about Gorilla's spreadsheets, which is that they drive the whole task rather than just the loops that make up different trials. This is achieved through a variable in the spreadsheet which specifies which display should be used with the other information that's available within the spreadsheet. Each of these displays consists of a series of screens, and each of these screens is built up of zones that control the presentation of images, video, or other stimuli, as well as allowing you to collect participant responses. Gorilla is the main resource we use for online collection of performance data, and one of its biggest strengths is the ability to manage collections of tasks and questionnaires within an experiment that a participant accesses. This experiment flow can be considered like a timeline for your whole experiment, which might consist of multiple performance tasks or questionnaires, and it can also control factors like randomization and delays. This makes Gorilla a really powerful tool where you want to be able to reach out to a wider population or to a population that's more difficult to access. You can get a free account at gorilla.sc, and they also provide great support with lots of tutorials and sample tasks that you can try out. It does, however, cost to recruit and host your experiment through Gorilla. So if you're at the University of Salford, we have access to a subscription, so you can access tokens that way. Otherwise, you'll be looking at having to buy tokens to host your experiment within the system. So, those are the four main pieces of experimental software that we use and support in Salford PsyTech. Hopefully, learning a little bit about them will help you to figure out what will be best for your own research, and we do encourage you to use the open source options like PsychoPy, Pebble and Gorilla to explore different tasks that you find interesting. Well, that's all for now.